Hello and welcome to another video here. Today we'll be discussing a couple of things, including a couple of signings, some playoff updates as one team has gone through to the Stanley Cup Final, some more injury updates, and some trade rumors involving the Columbus Blue Jackets, Chicago Blackhawks, and Calgary Flames. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here at the Instant Hockey channel. So I'll kick things off today as I usually do with a couple of signing updates that have happened from the last week. So we'll start off with a couple of contract extensions. First with Tampa Bay, as the Tampa Bay Lightning have signed right wing / center Michael Eyssimont to a 2-year contract extension that will have an average annual value of $800,000 per season. Now, Eyssimont, for the majority part of his career up to this point, had been a minor league forward, been playing over in the AHL. He played with the Jets last year, and a pretty decent season. Got into his first NHL action, putting up no points in one game, so it was good to see him get his first taste of the NHL. But for the most part, he was an AHL player. He put up 18 goals and 42 points in 58 games, which isn't half bad, and he was definitely a really productive AHL forward. So he came into this year, started in the AHL as well, put up 2 goals, 9 points in 9 games with the Jets AHL affiliate, and then was called up. And since he got called up, he's been doing quite well. He was playing with the Jets while they were injured. Jets got healthy enough to send him down to the minors, placed him on waivers, was claimed off of waivers by the San Jose Sharks, went to San Jose, played a really good role there with San Jose, had the most points of any team you play with this year. Then at the trade deadline, he was moved to Tampa in exchange for Vladislav Nemesnikov, and he finished out the season with Tampa, also played with the Bolts in the playoffs. Scored a pretty big goal in Game 5 to help the Bolts extend that series to 6. So he looks like a really good forward. Combined with all 3 teams, the Jets, Sharks, and Bolts at the NHL level, he was able to put up 5 goals and 15 points in 54 games, which isn't really bad for his first real NHL season. So Eyssimont looks like a really good young player. He should definitely be able to fit long-term in the bottom 6 for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I like the 2-year contract extension. We know the Bolts are a team who's pretty close to the cap, so they can use any sort of league minimum deals that they can get, and this deal is pretty close to league minimum. So really good for the Bolts. Eyssimont going to get some stability for the next couple of years, signing a 2-year $800,000 deal. He should be able to play in the bottom 6 for the Bolts. While the Bolts get a cheap, good bottom 6 forward who can really help them round out that bottom 6. So good sign for both those two sides. With the Washington Capitals, they signed AHL forward Michael Sgarbossa to a 2-year contract that have an average annual value of $775,000. So for Sgarbossa, he's actually been quite a good player. He does have some NHL experience, usually getting into a handful of games each and every season. Last year, he got into 10 NHL games, putting up 2 goals and 4 points, so not very productive. Was mostly an AHL player, putting up 10 goals and 21 points in 31 games. So he's a really good AHL player. He had been getting into a couple of NHL games over the past couple of seasons, mostly spending time in the AHL, but he had at some points been getting some NHL time. This year did not have any NHL time, was only an AHL forward, but was a really productive AHL forward, putting up 21 goals and 58 points in 60 games. So it's a really productive AHL forward. 2-year basically league minimum deal. I don't think it's a really bad deal for the Washington Capitals. He's a good depth forward. Probably will play majority of the season next year in the minors too, but if the Caps run into enough injuries and they don't have as much depth, then I could definitely see Sgarbossa come into the NHL for a couple of games. But definitely, good sign for the Capitals to get Sgarbossa locked up and have another good depth forward in the system for the next couple of years. Then over with a couple of entry-level contracts. I will start with the Nashville Predators, as they signed former 2021 first-round pick Fedor Svechkov to a 3-year entry-level contract that have an average annual value of $925,000, and the deal began at the start of next season. Now for Svechkov, he's been playing over in the KHL over the past couple of years, done pretty well. Had no points in 4 games a couple of years ago. This past year, he put up 2 goals, 4 points in 27 KHL games, so he looks really good, and he looks like a fantastic prospect for the Nashville Predators. Svechkov was taken 19th overall in the 2021 draft, so he's only been a couple of years removed from being drafted, so my guess would be he probably spends majority of the season next year in the AHL, continuing to his development, but in my opinion, either 1, maybe 2 years down the road, he should definitely be an NHL forward. He's a center, but I think he could play wing at the NHL level, so in my opinion, he could definitely be a really solid top 9 forward at some point in the near future. He looks like a really good player with a lot of good skill sets, So in my opinion, you put Svechkov in that top 9. It's another young piece for the Predators to add to their roster in the not too distant future. So good sign for the Predators to get another good young prospect locked up, and I would not be surprised if after maybe a year or two more in the AHL, Svechkov was a solid top 9 forward for the Nashville Predators. And then 3 players who signed their NHL contracts who were drafted this past year. First, the Vancouver Canucks. 15th overall pick and first round pick in 2022, Jonathan Lekkerimäki is signed with the Canucks on a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $950,000 and will begin at the start of next season. So for Lekkerimäki, he was the guy who originally I had predicted going in the top 10 in that draft. In my opinion, he did fall quite a bit. I know a lot of people thought that he was probably a top 10 talent who dropped in the draft. And the Canucks were able to snatch him up at 15. So Lekkerimäki looks like a really good player. He's been playing over in Allsvenskan over the past couple of seasons. Had 7 goals and 9 points in 26 games last year over there. This year, pretty productive as well, putting up 3 goals, 6 points in 29 games. So Lekkerimäki definitely looks like a really good forward. He can also play wing and center, so there's a lot of different options for Lekkerimäki. He's going to fit in really well long-term in the top 6 with the Canucks. I wouldn't even be too surprised that if the Canucks can get Pettersson locked up long-term, maybe Lekkerimäki plays with Pettersson at some point. I think that's a real possibility, but definitely. Lekkerimäki's a good young player, probably one of the top prospects for the Vancouver Canucks right now. And while I do think he probably still needs maybe a year or two more in development, most likely just a year, but it wouldn't surprise me if he went back to Allsvenskan next year, or maybe went to the AHL. But in my opinion, Lekkerimäki looks like a really good young forward, and it would not surprise me at all if he was able to get into the NHL roster, into the top 6 in the next year or two. So, good sign for the Canucks. The Dallas Stars have signed a defenseman. Young defender Leon Bichsel has signed his 3-year NHL contract. They'll have an average annual value of $950,000, and the deal will start at the beginning of next year. Now, for Bichsel, he's been a really good big defenseman over in the SHL, been a really good player over there, was one of the better players in the World Juniors a couple of months ago. He looks like a really good young forward. Been playing over in the SHL the past couple of years. Last year, pretty decent season, putting up a goal and 3 points in 29 games. This year, a little bit better, putting up a goal and 6 points in 45 games. So a little bit more game action, given the fact he's been trusted with a little bit more, and he did quite well. So Bichsel was the 18th overall pick in this past year's draft, and he looks like a really good young D prospect. It wouldn't surprise me at all if in the next year or two, probably after a year or two more in development, probably one more year in the SHL and then maybe a year in the AHL, if Bichsel was a top 4 defenseman for the Dallas Stars. I think he could be a really good fit in that top 4 with a guy like Miro Heiskanen. So, in my opinion, really good sign for the Stars, getting a future top 4 defenseman locked up for the next couple of years and getting him signed to his entry-level contract. And finally here with the Seattle Kraken, they signed one of their draft selections from this past year, and that is goalie Nicholas Coco, who has signed his 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $923,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next year. Now for Coco, he's been playing over in Liga over the past couple of years, only got into one Liga game last year, putting up a 1.00 save percentage and a 0.00 goals against average, so he did really well in his one game played. This year he was able to get a little bit more opportunity, got into 9 Liga games, and he did quite well, putting up a 0.903 goals against average and a 2.98 save percentage. So he looks really good. Coco, I think, could definitely be the future backup for the Seattle Kraken, maybe even contend for a starter position. So Coco was definitely one of the first goalies taken in this past year's draft, and it looks like he could be a really good goaltender. So in my opinion, that's a really good sign for Seattle to get what could possibly be their future goaltender locked up. And I think, Coco will probably still have a couple more years developing, probably 1 or 2 over in Liga, and then maybe another 1 or 2 years in the AHL. I think in time he could definitely be a really good NHL goaltender for the Kraken. So good to see the Kraken get him signed and get him on his entry-level contract. But definitely, good to see Isamon and Skarbosa get their contract extensions. They should be really good pieces for the Bolts and the Caps in the next couple of years as good depth forwards. Good to see Svechkov sign with Nashville, who should be a good top 9 forward. Good to see Lekkerimäki sign in Vancouver, who should eventually be a good top 6 forward. Good to see Bichsel sign with Dallas, who should eventually be a good top 4 defenseman. And also good to see Coco sign with Seattle, who should be eventually a good bottom 6 tandem goaltender for the Kraken. And I think all 6 of these signings are really good for the teams who signed them. That's all the signings we want to get to today. Next we go over to the playoff update part of our video. So first we go back to Tuesday, where we had the Golden Knights play the Dallas Stars. Now the Knights are up in the series 2-0. So this was basically a must-win game for Dallas. Basically, no one has ever come back from 3-0 deficits. There's only a handful of teams who've done it, so it was basically must-win for Dallas. And it didn't really get off to the great start. Within the first minute of the game, Golden Knights would open the scoring. Really good start for the Golden Knights, and Marchessault was able to find the back of the net, so Vegas was able to take the 1-0 lead. Then this play here, a really bad cross-check by Jamie Benn, led to a 5-minute major and a game misconduct. And we'll get to that play in a second, as it does have some big implications going forward. But in my opinion, it was a really bad hit, really bad cross-check by Benn. Let me know down in the comments what you think about the cross-check by Benn. But Benn was given a 5-minute major and a game misconduct, so Benn left the game and never returned. And the Knights were fortunate enough to get a 5-minute power play off of this. And then off of that 5-minute power play, Ivan Barbashev would score his 5th of the playoffs to increase the Golden Knights lead to 2-0. And then just a couple of minutes after the penalty ended, Bomb 6 forward William Carrier scored his first of the playoffs to get a 3-0 lead for the Golden Knights. And at that point, just a mere 7-8 minutes into the first period, the Stars would pull Oettinger and put Wedgwood into the net. So Oettinger was given the hook really early, and they put in Wedgwood in net. So Wedgwood was able to stop all the shots he faced. Dallas was not able to put anything past Hill, and the Stars were down 3-0 and basically a must-win game after the first period, and will not help in the second period. In the second, Knights were able to continue to push. They were able to stop all the Stars' attacks. Midway through the second period, Alex Pietrangelo would score to give the Knights a 4-0 lead. That's the way the second period would end. And then thanks to the brilliance and net of Hill and Wedgwood, there was no scoring more in the game, and the Knights were able to hold on for the 4-0 victory. So Knights win 4-0. They're now up 3-0 in the series with a chance to close it out tonight. So that's really, really good for the Golden Knights. They've been a really dominant team. The first two games were really close. I would even argue that the Dallas Stars probably deserved to win the second game. But in Game 3, it was a really bad first period from the Stars, and they could never really recover from that. So it's a really bad blow to Dallas. They're going to be trying to fight to keep their playoff hopes alive tonight. Benn, on that play that we just showed, did get a 2-game suspension, so he's not going to be in for Game 4 in Dallas while the Stars try and stave off elimination. And if the Stars do win, he will not be eligible to play in Game 5 as well. So that's going to be interesting to see. If the Stars can push 6, Ben could be back. But if the Stars lose in Game 4 or Game 5, Ben will not be back in the series. So really bad play from Ben that really did not help his team change momentum early on in the game. And that's going to cost him a spot in the lineup over the next 2 games. So really bad play from Ben. Oettinger, once again, getting pulled is really bad. I know if it was the first time, it would not be too bad, but he was pulled a couple of times in the Seattle Kraken series as well. So Oettinger looks a bit shaky, but they're going to need a really great game from him if he does wind up being the starter to push a Game 5 in Vegas. So Stars pushed up to the wall. Knights are trying to clinch and go on to the Stanley Cup Final for their second time in team history later tonight. And as for the other game, Panthers up 3-0, chance to close the series last night against the Carolina Hurricanes. Were able to get a really good start. Anthony Duclair and Matthew Tkachuk would score within the first 10 minutes of the first period to open the scoring and give the Panthers a 2-0 lead. But then it was the Hurricanes who were able to answer back just a couple minutes later from Paul Stastny to make it a 2-1 Panthers lead at the end of 1. Then early in the second, Teuvo Teravainen would score. Really good play from the guy who missed a lot of games in the first and second round due to injuries. So good to see him get on the scoreboard to tie the game at 2-2. But then a couple of minutes later, Panthers bomb 6 forward Ryan Lomberg would score to make it a 3-2 Panthers lead. That's the way the game went into the second intermission. 3-2 Panthers. And then late in the game, with 3:22 left, Jesper Fast was able to get a huge goal for the Hurricanes to tie the game up at 3-3. That's the way the third period almost ended, but then a very late power play for the Florida Panthers after a tripping call was called on the Carolina Hurricanes led to a power play with just over a minute left in the game. And on this goal here, remember all clips are credited to Sportsnet, but on this goal here from Matthew Tkachuk, in the dying moments of the third period with only 4.3 seconds to go in regulation, Matthew Tkachuk, who ended Game 1 in overtime, who ended Game 2 in overtime, ends Game 4, and sends the Florida Panthers, thanks to a buzzer beater, to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time since 1996. So an absolutely brilliant story from Florida. After being down 3-1 to the Boston Bruins, they've won 11 of 12 games, only losing since Game 4 against the Boston Bruins and Game 4 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. They've been 11-1-0 since losing Game 4 against the Boston Bruins. They've been able to dethrone 3 of the top 4 teams in the NHL in Boston, Toronto, and Carolina, and this team looks absolutely lethal. Bobrovsky looks like a fantastic player in net, and Tkachuk is leading the way offensively. And those two, as well as all the supporting cast in Florida, have gotten themselves to the Stanley Cup Final. The Panthers have only made it to the Stanley Cup Final once before. That was back in 1996 when they lost to the Colorado Avalanche. So they're now up to the Stanley Cup Final, and they'll be looking for their first ever Stanley Cup. I think it was a really good close series. Canes did lose in a sweep, but it was not a wide margin. It was not like 3-4 blowouts. These were all 1-goal games that went down to the wire. So, in my opinion, Carolina did really good. Definitely, if you're a Canes fan, I should probably have their off-season preview video at some point next week. And I'll probably have a blog post within the next couple of weeks discussing what the Canes should do in the offseason. So if you're a Carolina Hurricanes fan, stay tuned for that. But definitely, I think Carolina did really good. They had a really good season. They just ran into a hot Florida Panthers team who was able to get the final goals in each and every one of the games. So definitely going to be interesting to see what Carolina does in the offseason to try and get back to the Eastern Conference Final. But we know now that the Panthers are going to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time since 1996, looking for their first ever Stanley Cup victory. And the Vegas Golden Knights are going to look to join them later tonight. So, by this time on Tuesday, when I do my next video, we should have the Stanley Cup Final ready. If the Knights do win tonight, we'll have the Stanley Cup Final Knights and Panthers locked in today. If the Stars are able to win today, we'll have a Game 5 on Saturday. If the Stars win there, we'll have a Game 6 on Monday. And if the Stars win there, we'll have a surprising Game 7 on Wednesday. But I do not expect that to be the case. It most likely seems like it's going to be a Vegas-Florida final. So, really good for the Panthers to get to the Stanley Cup Final, and Vegas looks to join suit later tonight. And then next over here with the injury update part of the video, a couple of injuries to get to here, as there were a couple, mostly with the Carolina-Florida series, so we'll get to that one first. First with the Carolina Hurricanes. Both Stefan Noesen and Jacob Slavin left the game last night with upper body injuries, and they're going to be out for an unknown period of time. Now, with the Carolina Hurricanes now eliminated from the playoffs, it's not too big of an injury deal for those two players. They should, in my opinion, be back before training camp starts in August, September, so they'll probably just spend the offseason recovering and then get back for the Carolina Hurricanes training camp. So now that they're not in the playoffs, it's not too big of a deal, in my opinion. The Florida Panthers lost Eetu Luostarinen to an undisclosed injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. Now, with the Stars still going, and the Stanley Cup Final probably not going to start for the next couple of days, I would expect Luostarinen to get enough rest to probably be ready for Game 1. So, a bad loss in last night's game, but he should be able to get back and be ready for Game 1. Alex Barkov, who left Game 3 due to an upper body injury, was back and returned for Game 4. So really good stuff from Barkov to see him return right after he got injured in the previous game. So good to see Barkov get back, and now he'll have a little bit of rest time before the Stanley Cup Final. The Dallas Stars lost Evgeny Dadonov to a lower body injury, and he's out day to day. So he might miss tonight's pivotal Game 4 for the Dallas Stars. And if so, that could be a huge blow to Dallas, as Dadonov's actually been a really good middle six forward. So hopefully he can go for tonight's game, but it's starting to sound like he won't be able to go for tonight's game. Brett Howden, who did leave the game in Game 3 due to a lower body injury, is a game time decision for tonight. So Howden's a really good fourth line forward. If he can't go, that'll be a huge blow to the Golden Knights team, but hopefully he can go and he can get into game action. So good enough to be interesting to see if he's able to get into game action for tonight's game. Yanni Hakanpää, who missed Game 7 in the Seattle series, plus Games 1 and 2 in the Golden Knights series, due to injury, was able to get back and did get back into the lineup last night in Game 3. So good to see Hakanpää get back in the lineup. He's a really good big defender, so good to see him get back into the lineup for the Stars. And then a couple of injuries with non-playoff teams. Philip Hedl suffered an upper body injury, and Rasmus Sandin suffered a leg injury. Both are out for an unknown period of time. But with the Caps and Rangers not in the playoffs right now, they should both be able to recover for before training camp and get back at some point later in the offseason. So good to see guys like Hakanpää and Barkov get back. but not good news to see guys like Howden, Dodonov, Luostarinen, Slavin, Nosen, Hedel, and Sandin get back. And it's going to be interesting to see if Howden or Dodonov get back in tonight's game, and if Luostarinen can get back in time for the Stanley Cup Final. But definitely going to be interesting to see if those guys can get back and are healthy to go for the Stanley Cup Final and for tonight's Game 4 between the Stars and Golden Knights. That's all the injury updates I want to get to today. And lastly, here we go over to the trade rumor and news part of the video. So first here with the Calgary Flames. The Flames have gotten their new GM in Craig Conroy, who was actually a former player of the Calgary Flames and was someone who was in the organization already. So good to see Conroy get promoted to being the Flames now GM, replacing Brad Treliving. So good to see that part of their off-season business done. It's also going to be interesting to see what they sign as head coach. We know that they fired Daryl Sutter, so it's going to be interesting to see who they bring in as their new head coach. But good to see that they got at least the GM position locked up now. And there's been a lot of talk since then that new GM Craig Conroy is going to be making a couple of big decisions this offseason. Now, during his press conference, he did say that he does not want to have another situation like Johnny Gaudreau, who left at the 11th hour to free agency and signed with the Columbus Blue Jackets. And Gaudreau was a really big piece of that Flames team, so he doesn't want any more of that thing. So there's a lot of talk that he's going to be talking to all of the players who are going to enter in the final year of their deals this year. That's guys like Elias Lindholm, Tyler Toffoli, and Mikael Backlund on the forward group, and guys like Noah Hanifin, Chris Tanev, and Nikita Zadorov on the back end. So those are some pretty big pieces. Hanifin's a top line defender, Tanev's a top 4 defender, Zadorov showed he can be a really good third pair defender. Toffoli's a really good top 6 forward, while Lindholm and Backlund are really good top 6 centers. So it'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of speculation toward the end of the season, at the end of the season press conference, that both Lindholm and Backlund were unhappy with the way that things were going in Calgary. So maybe they are able to sign extensions now that they have a little bit of new life with a guy like Craig Conroy now as the GM. It's going to be interesting to see. I think they're either going to try and sign extensions for some of these players who are entering the final year of their deal, or they're going to be traded. Zadorov's a really good third pair defenseman, had a hat trick in the final game of the season, so it's going to be interesting to see if there's some teams who would want him. I would expect there would be definitely a couple of teams who would be interested. Tanev and Hanifin, both top 4 defensemen. When Tanev's been injured, he's definitely been felt as a loss, so a team would definitely be interested in having Tanev. Hanifin's a really good top 4 defenseman, so there would be a ton of teams interested in him. Lindholm's a really good top line center, so there would be a ton of teams interested in him. Backlund's a really good second, third line veteran center, so there would probably be a couple of teams interested in him. And Toffoli's coming off a really good season. I think it was the Flames' points leader last year, so it would not surprise me at all if there was a lot of teams interested in him. But I think the first order of business will be for the Flames to try and extend any one of those guys they can. I think they could definitely try and extend guys like Lindholm, maybe Backlund, maybe Hanifin, and if they can try and sign some of these guys, maybe they try and keep as much of their core together as they can. But there will probably be some changes, and I'll expect some guys, whether it be Toffoli, whether it be Lindholm, whether it be Tanev, to probably be traded at some point in the offseason as well. So they got their new GM in Craig Conroy, and that's a really good step forward. They still need their new head coach, and the Flames GM has a lot of big decisions to make with the team surrounding guys like Lindholm, Toffoli, Backlund, Tanev, Zadorov, and Hanifin, guys who are entering the final year of their contract who could be walking as free agents, but Flames don't really want that again. So either they're going to try and sign them to extensions, or it's quite possible that some of these guys could be traded in the not-too-distant future. Next with the Chicago Blackhawks. Now I've seen this a couple of places, and I think this is probably true, and that is that the Chicago Blackhawks will be willing to take bad contracts if they are able to get good young players or draft capital in return. So I would not be surprised if this was true. The Hawks, just like the Yotes a couple of years ago, are starting a rebuild, and they're trying to get as much draft capital and good young players as they can. We know Arizona has a boatload of draft capital in the next couple of seasons, and Chicago has actually done pretty well the past year and a half recruiting draft capital. So in my opinion, I would not be too surprised if this was true. Also, the Hawks are most likely going to draft Connor Bedard, so as much as they do have some players who have NHL level talent, I think the Hawks would probably want to try and surround them with at least some lower level NHL talent for the time being. I know they're probably not going to try to first round picks or anything for elite level players. I think they could try and maybe use like lower end draft picks to select guys on bad contracts, or take guys on bad contracts and get some compensation in return, whether it be a good young player or a decent draft pick. So in my opinion, I think that's a very likely possibility. Some players I'd be looking at who could possibly be fit that bill would be Josh Bailey in the Islanders organization. We know that the Islanders most likely want to move on from him. He's a pretty good middle six forward and a good veteran, so I could see the Hawks try and target him. Anthony Mantha in Washington, pretty good middle six forward. Didn't have the best of years with Washington this year, so I could see him go to Chicago. Ryan Johansson, we know that he's been a guy who's been on the trade block for the past couple of years for Nashville. Decent middle six center. He could definitely be on a trade block. A couple of defensemen who are on bad contracts, so I'm not exactly sure they will be willing to acquire, but guys like Mark-Edouard Vlasic or Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Larsson does have a no movement clause, so it would be a lot harder to move him, but those are two guys who have really bad contracts, who I think could be of interest to Chicago if they were to get some pretty big draft capital or prospect in return. But definitely, that's the sort of thing I'll be expecting from Chicago, trying to use some of their cap space to acquire some bad contracts, whether it be Bailey or Mantha or Johansson or someone else as well. But definitely, I think the Hawks need to surround Bedard with at least some NHL level talent, and if they can get draft pick for taking some of the bad contracts or some okay NHL level talent, I think they would definitely do that. So using the cap space to good use, I think, is not out of the question, and if they can get a good draft pick or a good prospect in return and surround Bedard with some NHL level veterans, then that would be a pretty good deal for the Chicago Blackhawks. So not surprised me at all if the Blackhawks would be willing to take on some bad contracts. Definitely something to keep our eye out over to the offseason. And finally, here with the Columbus Blue Jackets, there's a lot of talk around the NHL that while they are also looking for a top six center, they could also be looking for a top four defenseman. So a lot of top four defensemen out there right now, and there's definitely a couple of guys that could see them try and acquire. We know that they moved on from Vladislav Gavrikov in the trade deadline. They acquired the Kings' first-round pick from them, so that was a win for them. I think that pick is 23rd overall. It might be 22nd, but I think it's 23rd overall. And there have been some reports that they will be open to moving that Kings first-round pick if they were to get a top four defenseman who they can use in the top four immediately. So some guys who I could be seeing who could possibly be fit that bill, Sam Girard in Colorado. We know that the Avs could use some cap space. We know that they could use a couple of top six forwards. Girard's making $5 million, mostly as a third pair defenseman. And I think the Avalanche have enough depth on defense to make do without Girard's $5 million contract. So given the fact it could be a cap casualty, I could see him be moved to the Jackets. I think he would be a really good fit with Columbus. San Jose, if they can prime away, a guy like Mario Ferraro would be a good fit there. Good young defender who could definitely fit in their top four. Not a really good offensive producer, but a solid top four defenseman. A guy like Noah Hanifin in Calgary. As we just talked about, he'll be entering the final year of his deal. Really good top four defenseman. I think he would fit really well in that top four. So, in my opinion, that would be a really good addition for the Blue Jackets. Another guy would be Joel Edmondson. Same sort of thing with Hanifin in Calgary. Edmondson in Montreal entering the final year of his deal. The reported asking price was a first-round pick, so they could use LA's first-round pick to acquire Edmondson. He's a really good defensive defenseman who can play in the top four, so that would be another option for the Jackets. Another guy would be division rival Philadelphia Flyers defenseman Ivan Provorov, or maybe even Travis Sanheim. Sanheim's a good young defenseman on an 8-year contract. Like I said before, I don't expect him to be dealt, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if there were at least conversations around Sanheim. As for Provorov, there's a lot of speculation that he will be dealt, and I think he could definitely fit in well in the Jackets' top four. So in my opinion, you're looking at guys like Provorov, maybe Sanheim, Edmondson, Hanifin, Ferraro, Girard, some sort of guys like this who could fit in really well on the left side of that top four defense in Columbus. And I think if they had to move LA Kings first round pick to do it, I think they would definitely do that. But definitely, the Jackets had a pretty bad year this year, mostly due to injuries, and they're looking to take the next step forward and compete for a playoff spot next year. And they're looking for a top six center, and they're also looking for a top four defenseman, and they would be willing to move that Kings first round pick if they were able to get a NHL-ready defenseman who they can plug into the top four as early as next year. So definitely interesting to see. I'd like to hear what you think down in the comments. Which Flame do you think will be moved, and which Flame player do you think will be signed by the Calgary Flames, now Craig Conroy's GM? Do the Hawks try and acquire some bad contracts? If so, which player do you think would be the most likely target the Hawks try and get if they can get a draft pick or a prospect in return? And which defender do you think will be the most likely the Columbus Blue Jackets target to try and improve that top 4 defense? But definitely, I'd like to hear what you think down in the comments. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I also do a blog, which I'll leave a link to that in the description below. I keep up to date with all the news and rumors, plus off-season previews and stuff like that on my written blog too. So definitely go and check that out. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.